Chapter 5. The Last Witness. In the decades after the bombs fell, Japan rose from the ashes. Cities were rebuilt. Trains ran again. Industry returned. But beneath the surface of this post-war miracle, many survivors lived in silence. Their wounds hidden, their memories boxed away like relics too painful to unpack. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was one of them. For many years, he rarely spoke of what had happened. Not at home, not at work, not even to himself. He returned to Mitsubishi, where he spent the next several decades in the company's technical division, quietly drawing blueprints for ships that no longer had to serve war. He raised 3 children. He gardened. He wrote poetry. He tried to live a normal life. But the past never left him. He had seen 2 cities vaporized. He had heard the screams of dying strangers, once in Hiroshima, then again in Nagasaki. He had watched the sky bloom into a new kind of fire, and he had carried that fire with him ever since, in his blood, in his skin, in the things he could never unsee. And as he aged, something changed. The silence began to feel unbearable, from victim to voice. It wasn't until the 1990s, nearly 50 years after the bombings, that Tsutomu Yamaguchi began to speak publicly about his experience. By then, his body had begun to deteriorate. He had been diagnosed with cancer, the cost, he believed, of surviving 2 atomic blasts. Radiation had woven itself deep into his DNA, a reminder that some damage never truly ends. But he refused to let it define him. Instead, he chose to transform his suffering into testimony. He gave interviews. He wrote essays. He traveled to schools and spoke to students about the day the sun exploded. He met with peace activists. He talked with other hibakusha. And in every conversation, every speech, he returned to one central plea. Open quote. Never again. Close quote. Open quote. The only people who should be allowed to possess nuclear weapons, he once said, are those with the ability to survive 2 atomic bombs. And I can tell you, there aren't many of us. Close quote. Recognition and redemption. In 2006, after years of bureaucratic back and forth, the Japanese government finally did something unprecedented. They officially recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as the only person certified to have survived both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The distinction was both tragic and historic. He became a global symbol, not just of survival, but of what humanity risks every time it flirts with nuclear destruction. In 2009, he addressed the United Nations as part of a campaign for nuclear disarmament. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. Open quote. Having been granted 2 miraculous chances of survival, I now consider it my responsibility to pass on the truth, he said, to tell the world about the inhumanity of nuclear weapons. Close quote. That same year, American filmmaker James Cameron interviewed Yamaguchi for a documentary about nuclear war. The 2 men sat in a small room in Nagasaki. One had created the fictional apocalypse of Terminator. The other had lived through the real one, twice. The final days. In his last years, Yamaguchi's health declined rapidly. The cancer spread to his stomach, then to his liver. But his mind remained sharp. He continued writing. He continued advocating. He continued bearing witness. On January 4th, 2010, Tsutomu Yamaguchi died in Nagasaki at the age of 93. The city where he was born. The city where he was almost killed. The city he returned to and outlived. He left behind a wife who had survived the second bomb with him, children who carried his story forward, and a world still wrestling with the legacy of nuclear weapons. Legacy of a double survivor. Today, Yamaguchi is remembered as more than a statistical outlier, more than a historical footnote. He is remembered as a living bridge between 2 worlds, one that existed before nuclear weapons and one forever changed by them. He didn't ask to become a symbol. He didn't ask to survive. But when he did, he carried that burden with quiet dignity and eventually with powerful purpose. In a world still armed with thousands of nuclear warheads, his story remains a warning, a question, a challenge. Open quote. Can we, who never saw the flash, truly understand what it means to live in its shadow? Close quote. Perhaps the last word should belong to him. Open quote. I don't want future generations to go through what I went through. I don't want to hear that a 3rd bomb has fallen on anyone, anywhere, close quote. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, 1916 to 2010. Twice bombed, twice survived, never forgotten.